So, the last speaker, it's a good thing you get to listen to all the other speakers first and then make sure that you don't duplicate one of their jokes. And, well, I will talk about Who Wants to Fight. We've heard about the power and the people behind the scene, and then now I want to talk about who's doing the fighting, which is this nice baby here. I'm another speaker from Denmark, and there was also 2 Germans here, and that is the traditional British way, the Anglo-Saxons. In fact, these are the Danes and the Germans, so everything is as usual. A bit like a month ago or so, I wrote this blog post, Who Wants to Die for Globalists, and it was really just about the military news that you come out of a bunch of Western countries where we can read that every branch of the military is struggling to make recruits. And so clearly the men don't want to fight for these countries anymore, or what used to be their countries in this case. And there's quite a lot of this. It's not just say the UK. I've looked around a bit, and so we got I think it's Canada in the top left. We got I cannot remember which countries, and even the Danish one where it says the defense reduction in manpower is larger than ever before. Apparently, it looks like Western man has lost the will to live, more or less, or the will to power. So fighting, you can fight for many things. Here you can fight for your country, you can fight for your ethnic group or some sub-ethnic group. If Anglos and Saxons are too big, you can always fight for the Saxons or the sub-Saxons. There's always some other group. You can fight for your country, you can fight for your sex. We have this entire feminist movement. There doesn't seem to be a big man's movement. Men don't want to fight for men. But some women do want to fight for women, and a lot of men want to fight for women, but apparently not for men. You can fight for your sexual identity. There's no lack of this in the streets of London. It's as a matter of fact impossible to avoid it coming to London. You can fight for your profession. We have all the different kinds of strikes that we're also experiencing here, and so on. Many people can fight for a lot of stuff. You can fight, I just have pick some examples. You have the Nazi Wehrmacht people. There used to be the Irish Republican people. They've also lost the will to fight. They're not doing a lot of bombings anymore. Feminists are still going, and I think these are Sri Lankan tigers who they wanted to fight, but they lost. My message is that if you want to win, you must attract people who want to fight. In some sense or another. It does not have to be literally physical combat, but if that comes to it, then of course it has to be that. And my claim is that leftism or socialism is winning because it has more people that want to fight for it than the conservatives have. And generally speaking, fighting involves some kind of sacrifice. Of course, in actual war, you're gambling with your life or your limbs, but fighting on the internet, on Twitter, at least you spend a lot of time doing it. Or donating to people who do this sort of thing. So you must make some kind of sacrifice. Conservatives, on the other hand, are generally speaking the guerrilla party. They want to have a nice time, and they don't want to get involved in all this dirty politics or this sort of thing. Just to give some examples, statistics of this, leftists, they want to fight more than conservatives, and you can measure this in all kinds of ways, like whether people are literally willing to spend time on social media harassing people that disagree with you, or like whether they're willing to show up to a protest or disrupt something, like you have I saw the Stop Oil Now or whatever people outside. And then there's also people who make literally personal sacrifices. In the bottom left we have willing to defriend or literally avoid your own family members if they have the wrong opinion. That's very strong. You're doing a big sacrifice, like family disruption because someone disagrees about the president. Conservatives are much less likely to do this sort of thing. There's also, to return to the countries, there is a few ways you can look at this. There are some survey companies, Gallup, they ask people simply a question, would you fight for your country? And you can get the proportion of people who say, yes, I would fight for my country. World Values Survey runs all the time in 2020 and 2015. If you compare these two data sources, as you can see with this plot, they seem to agree a lot, even they're kind of using different, not exactly the same wording. Nevertheless, if you combine them, you get this kind of map. These are the people who want to fight, and well, as you can see over in in European land, it's kind of red. France is missing because apparently no one served French. No one can speak French. There's probably no French people here. You can see Japan essentially is the least willing country to fight on the planet, whereas China seems to be willing to fight. That's unhappy for us, since China is a growing enemy, so in world power affairs. So US is kind of, sort of willing to fight. Germany, these kind of countries, they're basically given up. I don't mean they don't want to fight anymore. One thing to note about Japan, of course, is that you guys will remember that there was something called World War II. And it looks like, when you look at the map, that people who lost World War II, they don't want to fight again. They're tired of losing. And so if you just kind of do a very quick way of analyzing this, you can put the countries in one group that lost World War II, and I've just picked these ones, and you can disagree about who was or who wasn't among the losers, because there's some like marginal players and like countries that changed sides, this sort of thing, like the Finns. There's also the winners, which mainly the Anglo worlds, and then some other people like French. I mean, they were fighting briefly, and resistance stuff. And then there's everybody else, and you can see indeed the blue group. The losers, they definitely want to fight less now. So there's something to this theory, but of course there's many other things that's special about Japan and so. Islam is, of course, kind of like a lot of the immigration really has to do with Islam, and they definitely want to fight. They do terrorism, this sort of thing. They even win wars in Afghanistan. I don't think it's a coincidence when we're looking at the map of which countries want to fight, and if you notice that the US lost kind of 2 wars to these kind of weak enemies, one of which was Afghanistan and the other one was Vietnam, and if indeed you look at these surveys, they have very high willing to fight. So it seems that if you simply tire the enemy out, at some point they're going to give up because they don't want to fight anymore. Islam, as you can see, since most countries are either very Islamic or not at all, then you kind of get a plot like this with kind of 2 groups. It seems that there's some association with Islamic countries want to fight more. If you just kind of do it by religion, like at the individual level, you ask people their religion, ask if they want to fight, you kind of get this pattern. Hindus, Muslims, I mean, Hindu is that's just Indians. There's no, this is the only real place. What about wealth of nations? It seems like wealth of nations, lots of willing to fight. Like when things get good, nice times create weak men, this sort of mentality. Indeed, if you do the obvious plot, you get something like this. Wealthier people, by country basis, they don't want to fight so much, with some exceptions. Apparently Norwegians want to fight. Fijians, not sure why they want to fight, but they're the most interested people in the world. The least interesting is Japan, JPN down there. These are the people there that basically don't want to live almost. Ethnic diversity, you can kind of think that if you are in some country with more ethnic diversity, maybe the government doesn't represent your ethnic fraction, it makes sense not to fight for them. This might explain a bunch of like wars and stuff. There are some data sets of this, and if you plot the data, you get nothing like this, which is kind of difficult to accept. It seems obvious, so maybe there's some kind of problem. So when you have, I'm sorry to have a bunch of data like this, but when you have multiple factors, of course, you want to kind of try to figure out which one seems to be the most important, and if you're a social scientist or any other kind of scientist, you're going to throw them into a regression model, and you hope for the p-values to be small for the things that you like. And so very helpfully, I've marked the p-values with explanatory symbols, and red means it's very low. Yellow question mark means it's borderline, so that basically if you like the thing, you're going to like this result, and if you don't like it, you're going to dismiss it as a fluke. So you can choose and pick. The things that seem to be important when you control for all the other things here, I've included the winning status, win or lose in World War II, which kind of region of the world, the Islamic percentage, GDP, and the ethnic diversity. So here we're considering these factors simultaneously. And it looks like even if controlling for everything else, losing in World War II is still associated with not willing to fight. Various regions of the world have people that want to fight more, especially you have the MENA, the Middle East, North Africa, Southern Eastern Asia. They want to fight more. Melanesia, don't know why they want to fight. They're very willing. Then we've got the things that were plausible, and if we look at, say, Muslim percentage, it was a nice plot before you saw that Muslims were much more willing to fight, but when you control for the other things, there's actually no effect of Islam that we can see. So it's maybe Islam is simply correlated with being Middle Eastern, and it turns out Middle Easterners want to fight, and they just incidentally happen to be Muslim. Maybe, and that's just basically what statistics is telling us. GDP is, yeah, it still seems to be associated with less willingness to fight, and ethnic diversity now is also associated with less willingness to fight. So it seems that kind of most explanatory factors sort of work out, except for Islam. The academics, of course, are also studying this sort of thing, and the academics is kind of the enemy elite for the most part. They've also come up with some interesting theories. They have this one paper, Tripwires and Free Riders, which is about America. And the American empire has kind of forgotten that the war is over, so there's still American bases in Germany and Japan and in Korea, and wars that are essentially people that have been their allies for like more than half a century, but they still keep their bases there. And so maybe people get compliant and they're complacent, and then they say, maybe if America is protecting us, we don't need to protect ourselves, so let's just de-invest in the military, right? And that's, America is always complaining that the other countries are not having the 2% GDP or whatever spending on military, and indeed these people, they do some of their own regressions that look like this, and which may be all gibberish to you, so I'll go over it. And basically, they find that having an American military base also predicts less willingness to fight, because you're thinking in the back of your head, why would I risk my life when America has got nukes and they have a base here, so they're obviously around and I don't need to fight. So in this model, they're not looking at countries per se, they're looking at each person in a country, so they have some factors which relate to a single individual, these are the ones on the top, and there's some factors that relate to the country, so the academics would call a multi-level model. So we have some very obvious stuff. Being a man is related to wanting to fight for your country. Well, I understand, I don't blame women. Being younger, well, it makes sense. If you're 80 years old, you've done your duty, and apparently being richer within a country seems to be related to want to fight. It seems that the people who are kind of lazy on welfare, well, they don't want to fight either, so it's not like they're kind of giving a trade-off. National pride, obviously, people who like their country more are more interested in wanting to fight. People who have confidence in their own military want to fight more. It's kind of obvious. If you think your military is completely dysfunctional and corrupt, then why would you sign up for it and die? Not being pro-choice, which the authors have defined as people who were in favor of abortion, gays, and all these kind of LGBTQ things. Apparently that's related to not wanting to fight, so that's kind of a leftism, wokeness indicator. Not being democratic, the democracies want to fight less, which is unfortunate. If you're a fan of democracies, it seems that then they would eventually be their own undermining over time. If you're just going to convert to democracy, it's all nice, you get rich, and then you get invaded. And then you don't have democracy again, and then we repeat this cycle at some point. An interesting factor is that the countries that have conscription have men that are more willing to fight. So basically, when you conscript some men, you could say these men then kind of get a brothers in arms kind of feeling from their military experience, and then this later, when someone gives them a survey when they're like 45, they still have this feeling of camaraderie from their military experience. And it seems that you can foster some fighting spirit in this way, which is kind of an interesting justification for conscription. Not being religiously divided, so these academics didn't want to dare talking about ethnic diversity, so they talked about religious diversity, but in practice these turn out to be much the same thing. Not being religiously divided. When you have a religiously divided country, then they're less willing to fight. And the US one, having a US base that we talked about. There's also the talk about the long peace, and essentially people are looking at overtime. It seems that the Westerners are getting less willing to fight. It seems that we were once kind of proud, warlike Anglo-Saxon types, and now we're all soft and low testosterone and this sort of thing. So the academics, of course, they're thinking willingness to fight is kind of bad because war is bad, and so democracy is good. So that's the way they're thinking of it. The last funny example was this is the suffragist piece. That is the women's vote movement, for those who forgot. And so essentially they're finding that as the more women are in power in a country, the less these countries are willing to fight. Maybe men think women's decision making is stupid, or maybe it's really just a proxy for something else. They don't really go into these kind of details. So it seems that if we kind of look overall, democratic, leftist, old, feminized, unpatriotic, religiously diverse, and so on, these countries, they seem to promote peace. in the sense that if you have a country where no one wants to fight, then it's a bit difficult to have a war. You're just going to capitulate immediately. Here we have some people who've been talking about the future of Europe with regards to, well, religious diversity. And, well, it's not looking too good. Here's the Pew Research estimating the Islam percentage in 2050, so only 30, well, almost 30 years from now. And these numbers are probably too low. I think France is already almost at 20%. They're kind of hiding the statistics. So it seems that there's no good things inside. I mean, if you want to fight that. Root causes, it's a bit unclear. Why are all these things falling kind of in tandem? Why don't Western men want to fight anymore? It seems there's one thing that's associated with this, that there's a falling level of testosterone that has been noted in many Western countries, and also the sperm quality is declining, and all these kind of essentially measures of being manly, and then you get funny titles like "You are not the man your father was," which turns out to be literally true. He was indeed, this like two dog meme. It's basically true. It does not really explain the left-right-wing gap in willingness to fight in politics, because right-wing men are actually more masculine and they're higher T and therefore should want to fight more, but as we've seen, they tend to be more the guerrilla type. Maybe it's the media we can blame. It's when you run out of ideas, blame the media. Here we have the New York Times talking about the right's violence problem, and earlier we had Helmut talk about how in the Danish media, the media is always talking about right-wing extremism and right-wing violence and this sort of thing. And whenever you look at the Europol data, it's always Muslims and leftist people doing the violence. So why is it we're talking about one thing and the other people are doing it? So maybe the reason the right-wingers don't want to fight so much is that basically they're being shamed. Like, you guys are violent, so they're reacting by, no, I'm definitely not violent. I'm a good guy, and I will not do any kind of willingness to do this kind of warfare, and I will just do the good life, the guerrilla life. And maybe that's why. On the positive side of a guerrilla life is that, well, one way to fight is, of course, being mean on Twitter, and you can find a hand weapon. There's another way to fight, the long war. It's a demographic war. And here we have simply the fertility rates, so the number of kids per woman. And as in the old, it's the birth cohorts that maybe you'll be able to see. So it used to be that left-wingers and right-wingers in the US had the same number of kids. They used to have both of them like 2 point something. But then, as you can see, in the last 3 decades or so, 4 decades, right-wingers have a massive fertility advantage. So the religious people and the right-wing conservatives, they're basically outbreeding the lefties within countries. And so they may not be willing to fight on Twitter and such, but if you simply replace the enemy, then eventually you will win. It's going to take 100 years or more. So in that sense, there's some willingness to fight. And you can also see here they looked at the counties of America, and the ones that voted more for Trump also have high fertility. So it seems conservatives are kind of winning this like breeding war. It's just going to take a while. So to summarize, if you want to win, you must fight in one way or another. Conservatives and Europeans, they don't seem they want to fight much anymore. Some of it may be some people who lost the Second World War, like we saw with Japan and this. But leftists and Middle Easterners, they seem to want to fight, and indeed they're kind of winning. Like, global politics is very left-wing. It's been going this direction for decades. Middle Easterners are coming to our countries. We cannot even prevent them from having grooming gangs. And it's all very sad. Some level of general decline may be related to the testosterone decline, as we see, but that cannot explain these like political divisions. But that can maybe explain the over time differences, but that just really begs the question, why is testosterone falling? Like, have we just found one root cause, and really it's caused by something else? No one really knows why testosterone levels are falling. First they were denying it, now they're accepting it, and it's unknown cause of the left-right gap in fighting will. But on the positive side, at least the conservatives are winning the breeding war. Thank you.